This is the police pursuit through the streets of Streatham, South London on the night of the 5th of September 2022 that led to 24-year-old Chris Kaba being gunned down by Police Sergeant Martyn Blake.
We're now at Dumbarton Road, continuing on straight through the junction onto Shale Road. I believe it becomes Shale Road. Still Tilson Gardens, continuing. So all ARVs on this channel, just for your awareness, we are now just standing by for strikes. Stand by. Okay, we're going to do it. It's a near side indication onto Coastal Gardens. Do it here. It's a inline.
Doors! Oh, police! Show me your hands! Shot fired! Where from? On the front! Doors! Doors! Oh, police! Show me your hands!
On the 21st of October 2024, Martyn Blake was cleared of Mr. Kaba's murder. What Kaba does after having the police shout at him that they're armed and that he should show them his hands is to try to escape. I think that is beyond question. I don't think he's seeking to cause the police officers any harm. It may be that he's prepared to harm them if they don't get out of his way, but in my opinion, that isn't his direct intention. He rams 2 police vehicles. I think it's very unlikely that he would have made it through those police vehicles. Shooting at Kaba's vehicle's tyres, trying to physically drag him out of his car, or if you're going to shoot him, aiming somewhere on his body that's less likely to cause his death. These are all ways in which Kaba's death could have been avoided. A police marksman is a highly trained police officer. They know that shooting someone has to be a remedy of last resort. Let's try to find out more about why Martyn Blake felt it was necessary to shoot Mr. Kaba and to shoot him in the forehead, which is what he did.
The single gunshot caused catastrophic brain injury. The bullet was not intact inside Mr. Kaba's skull. He had multiple lacerations from the shattered windscreen.
I've actually made an assumption, which is that Martyn Blake, the police sergeant who shot and killed Mr. Kaba, felt that it was necessary to shoot him. Did he? Did he really? Let's try to find the answer to that as well.
Doors!
Here's the incident over again. This time from Martyn Blake's point of view. This is his body-worn camera footage. Look to the far left of the screen. You can just make out his rifle. Blake had been accused of the murder of Chris Kaba, an unarmed black man. Every detail in this 13-second incident has been the subject of a murder trial.
So, we now know how the incident looked to the person who shot Mr. Kaba. We can also appreciate just how quick and almost instant everything was, the whole incident having lasted, as the reporter just told us, a mere 13 seconds. But we don't yet know why Mr. Blake shot Mr. Kaba. Why did Mr. Blake shoot Mr. Kaba? It didn't look like a case of self-defence, at least to me. I admit that I'm ignorant, but he was, after all, put on trial for murder.
The jury was shown multiple angles of footage from the incident, and the defence repeatedly stated that Mr. Blake believed his colleagues' lives were at risk because the vehicle was being used as a weapon.
A car is a lethal weapon. 1.5 tons driving past you every day is far more dangerous than someone walking down the street with a shotgun, for example. If a car is driving towards me, what the hell are you expected to do? Or if they've tried to drive towards you, then they've reversed and they're having another go, or you perceive that, then you are going to stop and you're in every right to.
The prosecution told the jurors for a firearms officer to shoot and kill, it should understandably be a remedy of last resort. The body-worn footage and footage from cameras on police vehicles reveals, we say, that it was not necessary to shoot. He went on, this is a case of murder rather than the use of lawful self-defence or lawful defence of another by the defendant. And the prosecution went on to say that Mr. Blake may have been angry, frustrated and annoyed when he shot Mr. Kaba dead because he had been trying to escape at that moment.
Well, the prosecution's argument clearly failed. Mr. Blake shot and killed Mr. Kaba in defence of himself and or of others. That is clearly the grounds on which he was cleared of murder. In other words, Mr. Blake was found to have had no mens rea. He lacked the intention to either kill or to cause serious harm. Without that intention, there can never be a conviction for murder. Mr. Kaba's fiancée gave birth to a baby girl a few days before Mr. Kaba's funeral took place. Mr. Kaba's family and Mr. Kaba's many other supporters are fighting on. They disagree that Mr. Blake acted with proportionate force. They are seeking new legal avenues of redress against him.
A not guilty verdict for Martyn Blake, the officer who fired that bullet, saw hundreds of protesters outside the Old Bailey. On a day, a family and a community felt the justice system failed them. Chris Kaba's cousin had these words outside court on behalf of his parents.
Since Chris was stolen from us, and this decision shows his life and many others like him doesn't matter to the system. Our son deserved better. The acquittal of Martyn Blake isn't just a failure for our family, but for all those affected by police violence.
Many of whom being, like Chris Kaba himself, young black men.
In 2021, at a public inquiry into the shooting of Jermaine Baker, an officer from the Specialist Firearms Command presented data showing that, at that time, of the 44 people shot by the Met since 2001, 48% were black, and 43% of those suffered fatal injuries. When compared to the 2011 census figures on London's black population, it showed that black citizens are as much as 4 times more likely to be shot by the Met as their white counterparts, and as much as 3 times as likely to die. High-profile cases include Azal Rodney, Mark Duggan, and Jermaine Baker.
So, when a black criminal suspect is shot and killed by police, like Chris Kaba and others, mentioning racism as a possible reason for the shooting and killing of that person isn't necessarily a matter of playing the race card. It's not playing anything at all. It is, in many cases anyway, a very strong and realistic possibility.
We have to respect legal processes. However, we do also have to respect the fact that the CPS thought that there was enough evidence to bring a murder charge.
The prosecution claimed that the use of force wasn't necessary and that Martyn Blake's reasons for shooting were false and grossly exaggerated. And many others say that his description of Chris Kaba as a black male, comparatively young and athletic, can't be ignored.
The fury of the group gathered here isn't just about a not guilty verdict after a day of deliberation. They feel it's about years of systemic racism that they will continue to protest against.
In any event, some are saying that Martyn Blake's prosecution for murder was nothing more than a PR exercise.
A police officer has never been found guilty of murder or manslaughter offences in relation to a police shooting. The law makes conviction extremely difficult because police only have to think they were at risk to shoot in self-defence. One police source told us that there are concerns within the Met about the police watchdog investigation and the Crown prosecution case. A feeling that the decision to charge Martyn Blake was about deflecting public criticism. There have been multiple public inquiries and investigations into police shootings. They've consistently recommended avoiding the use of lethal force by employing other tactics.
Now that the murder trial is over, the truth about Mr. Kaba, drill rapper, aspiring architect and a few other things as well, is now allowed in the public domain.
On the evening of the 4th of September, the night before the shooting, police received a report of gunshots and saw a man with a shotgun. That report said 3 men left the scene in 2 cars. One was an Audi Q8, registration YF19NMM.
Which was the registration of the very Audi that Chris Kaba was driving when he was pursued by the police on the night of the 5th of September 2022. Chris Kaba was a gangster.
Police intelligence had suggested that Kaba was a core member of a notorious South London gang, the 67 gang. He was named in a trial earlier this year as the gang's gunman who shot a rival twice in the leg in a nightclub attack a week before he was shot dead by police.
Minutes before the shooting, on their way into the nightclub, the red arrow shows the victim. The blue arrow is the alleged gunman Chris Kaba. It was the week before Kaba's death. In the packed bar, Kaba pushes his way through the crowds towards the victim. He opens fire. The victim, hit in the leg, manages to run. Chris Kaba calmly puts the gun in his bag and in the chaos strides out. Only then does he start to run, chasing the victim and shooting him a second time.
He'd arrived at the nightclub in the Audi Q8 car in which he was stopped and shot 2 years ago. And he would have stood trial, as others were put on trial, charged with attempted murder after that nightclub shooting. In the legal argument before this latest trial, the defence had described Chris Kaba as the principal gunman of the 67 gang, a gang involved in a very violent dispute, long-running dispute with a rival gang that had led to numerous gun discharges, stabbings and murders, according to Martyn Blake, the police officer on trial, his defence barrister. 10 days after his death 2 years ago, Chris Kaba was due in court, a civil hearing, in which police were hoping to apply for what's known as a gang injunction. This is something that's used to restrict the activities of somebody thought to be a gang member and involved in violence. Now, Chris Kaba's previous convictions, again, all this was kept from the jury. In 2005, he was convicted of affray and possession of an offensive weapon, a belt. In 2017, Chris Kaba was jailed for 4 years for possession of an imitation gun. And in 2020, 5 months jail he got for failing to stop and for possession of a knife.
Bad character evidence, like the criminal history of Chris Kaba that we've just learned about, is sometimes allowed by a judge in a trial, and we've heard that the defence in this case definitely pushed for it. However, the judge denied that request. It may well be related to the fact that when the police were pursuing Kaba, they didn't actually know who he was, they didn't know about his criminal history, although they did have a suspicion that whoever was driving might have been involved in a shooting, although on the other hand, it could have been that that person wasn't involved in the shooting. They just didn't know who was driving, and therefore Mr. Kaba's criminal history had nothing to do with the fact that Martyn Blake shot him. I believe that those are the reasons why the judge denied the defence's request for the admission of Chris Kaba's bad character evidence, and it's what other commentators seem to be saying as well.
The police officer that fired that shot didn't know anything about who was in the car. He knew that the car was linked to a firearms incident, and so clearly there was a suspicion that it might have guns in the car. The occupant might be a gangster, but he didn't know it was Chris Kaba at the time, which is why the jury didn't know that and why the information was withheld. But it's very important to understand that, to give a rounded view of this individual.
In view of Chris Kaba's history of offending, in particular his history of violence, many commentators, notably those belonging to the right wing of politics, feel that what happened to Chris Kaba served him right.
He drove at them. He rammed their car. I mean, what do you expect? The coppers to go, "Oh, sorry to have bothered you, Mr. Kaba."
A man who is asked to stop his car, who decides to ram into the police and put them in such a state of fear that they think they have to shoot him because he might shoot them.
Because Martyn Blake honestly felt that a colleague their life might be in danger.
The guy was a wrong 'un. Not that that means that he should be killed by police. They didn't even know he was the person driving the car. It wasn't his car at the time. But nevertheless, he's been played out as some innocent guy who's about to be a dad. Just some lovely, nice guy. He was involved with the police repeatedly. He was involved in a gang. He was involved in shootings. I'm sorry, the police had every reason to be scared that this was a man who could cause them injury or death.
Sergeant Martyn Blake, who discharged his weapon, fired it through the windscreen of a car and killed suspect Chris Kaba, was acquitted of murder. A lot of coppers to say, what was he doing in the dock in the first place? This was in the line of duty.
Just before this occurred, Chris Kaba had only just come out of prison after being convicted of possession of a firearm with intent to endanger life or cause threats to people. And the car, of course, was uninsured. Further point for this soon-to-be father, we should remember that, in fact, contrary to what everyone was saying, that an injunction had been taken out against him by his pregnant girlfriend because he'd beaten her up when she was pregnant. So just a little bit of background for people who don't know.
There's a very important reason why there are no pictures of Martyn Blake in the public domain.
There was more legal argument before Martyn Blake's trial over the defence wanting his anonymity kept. In the end, we were allowed to name him but not to picture him. The defence had claimed in that legal argument that Martyn Blake's life was at risk as the gang, the 67 gang of which Kaba was allegedly a core member, might want to identify the officer and try to kill him in revenge for him shooting dead Chris Kaba.
About an hour ago, the Justice for Chris Kaba campaign group, led by his cousin, spoke outside the Old Bailey, where they said they'd continue fighting for Chris, for justice and for real change. Chris's life mattered, they said, and nothing could take that away from them.
I think that the appeal against the verdict, if any, coming from Chris Kaba's family, will hinge on the fact that there were other methods by which Mr. Kaba could have been restrained. Shooting him, as the prosecution argued, wasn't necessary, given, for instance, how many other police officers were there, given that even if Mr. Kaba had tried to reach for some kind of weapon, because at the time the police, in my opinion, didn't know that Mr. Kaba didn't actually have a weapon, they still had time to deal with him in other ways. Or, at that point, if, for instance, if Mr. Kaba were to have reached for a weapon, that would have given the police justification for the action that they took. In other words, Mr. Blake would have had far greater justification for shooting Mr. Kaba. His act, in that case, would be likely to be accepted by the family as proportionate, possibly. Even if Chris Kaba's family isn't able to bring any further action against Martyn Blake, the story may well not yet be over for Martyn Blake.
Tell us though, Peter, what will happen to Martyn Blake now, because I'm told he might still have to suffer the indignity of some kind of, misconduct charge.
Beautifully put, thank you. Yes, he might do. There will be a review of everything that was said during the trial to see if there is any reason to put him on such a misconduct discipline panel, which quite frankly now would be beyond insulting and beyond ludicrous.
Yeah. So Mark Rowley, Metropolitan Police Commissioner, makes what for me are some rather worrying points in his speech on the outcome of the Chris Kaba murder trial.
No firearms officer sets out on duty intent on ending a life. Their sole purpose is the complete opposite: the protection and the preservation of life. Sergeant Blake made a split-second decision on what he believed was necessary to protect his colleagues and to protect London. The jury decided that was an honestly held belief and that the force used was reasonable. Any fatal use of force understandably prompts huge concern amongst communities, particularly in black communities where trust in policing is low. There remains much for us to do to strengthen confidence in our service, and we know incidents like this place further strain on already challenged relationships. No police officer is above the law, but we have been clear that the system holding police to account is broken. I worry about the lack of support officers face for doing their best. But most of all, I worry for the public. The more we crush the spirit of good officers, the less they can fight crime. That risks London becoming less safe.
Have you got faith in the UK justice system? If you have, you may well be alone. If this video has gripped you, I recommend you to watch this one next. I'll meet you there.